the first, like what not to do is don't go hire 20 PhDs and write your own code or build your own model. Don't immediately out of the gate first thing buy a bunch of companies. And the reason is because you don't yet have any expertise, any experience. You don't know what problem you're trying to solve.
Hi, I'm Greg Stewart, CEO of MMA Global, the international nonprofit trade association for CMOs who are focused on architecting a new future of marketing.
I'm Rex Briggs, an author, market researcher, measurement inventor, and entrepreneur.
Now, Rex, you and I agree a lot. There is, that we are constantly telling anyone who will listen that if you aren't really fixated in implementing AI into your marketing now, you're going to be in trouble much sooner than you'd like. And I think we know that there are a lot of early experiments that are kind of on the surface level, and there's some that aren't really always successful and useful yet, but...
Yeah, our guest today argues that in some ways that's because many companies don't really have a plan or a roadmap, and they're reinventing the wheel with their AI testing. And he's here to help us work through what a roadmap looks like.
Yeah, the guy who finally thought about it, Jim Lecinski, is with us today. He's a clinical associate professor of marketing at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. He previously spent 12 years at Google. In fact, he's written a book here that you're going to hear about. It's his second book that he's written. But he's really done the work and the research for real business insights as well. And so I'm super excited to pick his brain today in a way that I don't know I've had a chance to yet. So,
Jim's
Hi,
latest
Greg.
book. Yep. Jim's
Hi,
latest
Greg.
book is called. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry about that. One last little part, then we'll get you in there. Jim's latest book is called The AI Marketing Canvas, a 5-stage roadmap to implementing artificial intelligence in marketing. And we're going to dig into that book right now. So, Jim, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Rex. Hi, Greg. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be with you both today.
So, Jim, why'd you write the book? Like, what, the book's been out there. I think what's interesting about your book, I'll just say this here before we kind of jump into questions. The book was published in 21, which means you wrote this book in 2020. So you're kind of like the AI OG, I think, for marketing, I think, right? Would that be right?
Yeah, we certainly wrote it, my co-author and I, and credit to my writing partner, Dr. Rajkumar Venkatesan from the Darden School at University of Virginia. We certainly wrote this before sort of the, year of the AI explosion last year. And by the way, we did write it by hand. It was not written by any GPTs, ChatGPT or otherwise. But yeah, we were having a lot of conversations between the two of us and, with our students as well as, with the consulting projects and the clients we work with, many of whom are your members and your listeners. Yep. And, it seemed like, well, there was a lot of heat and buzz for a while around blockchain and metaverse, and there always seems to be a shiny object. This one seemed to be more than a shiny object. And so, Rex, I know you and Greg as well were early in on this and, taking a look at what really these tools are under the hood and now how they can be used. And so we decided, seeing as how there were a lot of what I'll call low calorie writing on this or no calorie writing, short vendor blog posts. And, sometimes it was very helpful and very illuminating. There was nothing really rigorous out there to help marketers. And so that was the project that we endeavored to undertake and seems to have been pretty well received along the way.
I'm so glad you've looking at this topic and diving in because there is a need for a roadmap and where to start. A lot of people are reinventing the wheel, and it just feels like that it's a waste when they think that nobody else has done this before or thought about this before, and then they start actually sometimes on the wrong path to begin with. So talk to us a little bit about what you think a marketer should do to begin to form that roadmap to really look at your canvas. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, just amplifying your excellent point, Rex. It is a little bit crazy if you step back and think about this, because if I were to ask, you or any good marketer, like, I don't know really anything about social marketing, I don't know anything about search marketing, right? Like, what do I do? How do I get started, right? Like, we're not just all inventing that from white, whole cloth, greenfield. Like, there's a proven set of steps that you go through, a maturity model, et cetera. But yet here, even I had some conversations the other day with some fairly well-known marketing organizations, and like everybody is independently on their own, bumping around in the dark, trial and error school of hard knocks. So what do we do here? We tried to take a more rigorous approach, and we went and interviewed many dozens of firms and marketing leaders, some of whom had been further down the AI path, some who were just beginning their AI journey, some of whom would be what the three of us would reasonably or objectively describe as successful with their AI initiative, and others that would have, I guess, what my kids would call #hard fail with their AI initiative. And so, some of them were willing to go on the record, company names, their individual names, others, to protect the guilty or protect the innocent, preferred to go off the record. And what we did was have a series of pretty in-depth interviews, open-ended discussions with them, and then went back and coded the responses. And you guys know this technique, and sometimes it reveals nothing clear as mud, but in this case, it actually revealed a pretty clear pattern, which I'm happy to describe, the roadmap that you foreshadowed, Rex. There were a series of things in order that those who were more successful tended to be doing, and there was a series of things that those who were not successful tended to be doing. Certainly, when you look at sort of what the leaders are doing versus what the laggards or the winners versus the strugglers are doing. And that's what became the title of the book, the main concept of the book, the AI Canvas. And so I'm happy to go into the stages and what we learned if you'd like.
Yeah, Jim, why don't you go ahead and do it? Let's jump right in here. Yeah. So what did you discover? What's the roadmap? How does somebody get started? In the limited time we have here, let's cover as much of that as we can. That's great.
And really focus on the differences between those winners or the hashtag fail and the ones who succeed.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good place to start, Rex. I love that suggestion. I think we can do a little bit of myth busting right out of the gate, right? So there are a number of firms when we did our research, but also you read now in the press, or we're all talking to like this week, who think that the way to get started here is to go, hire a floor full of PhDs from Stanford or Northwestern or MIT and start writing your own models and creating your own algorithms and your own code and building everything in-house from scratch because we can't trust anybody. And while there are, certainly privacy, confidentiality, hallucination concerns and risks, and we can talk about all those, that's really not a great place to start from zero. And we can talk about why, but that tended to not be a successful first step. The other first step was, well, I guess we got to go buy 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 AI companies. We got to go find some hot Silicon Valley startup. And while there's a few success stories, John Deere is one that comes to mind when they bought the Blue River Group with their AI vision technology to put on their combines I guess that's back to 2018. That story made the rounds and people are aware of that. That's generally not been a successful path. And, again, we're here to uplift everybody, but one need look no further than McDonald's, where they went and bought a couple of AI companies, and that obviously didn't prove successful, and they had to kind of spin those back out and reboot. So the first what not to do is don't go hire 20 PhDs and write your own code or build your own model. Don't immediately out of the gate, first thing, buy a bunch of companies. And the reason is because you don't yet have any expertise, any experience. You don't know what problem you're trying to solve. You haven't even fully educated yourself. So, think about that in your own personal life, right? Oh, hey, I'd like to live in a different house. Great, I'll start ordering bricks. No, right? You're just not going to do that. You're going to work with somebody who's been there, done that before. And so, briefly then the 5 steps that we uncovered in the Canvas are, step 1 is, you got to build your foundation, and that is really largely around getting your own zero-party and first-party data. We can talk about the, already in progress cookie deprecation, the cookie apocalypse, as we've all feared, is here. Yep. So, in order to train these models with training data, you have to have some zero-party, first-party data. But then from there, what we found is the next best step is to actually work with your already trusted partners. So likely you have an email vendor or partner, you've got a search partner, you've got a social partner, right? You've got a CRM partner. Go talk to them and say, hey, what AI-powered options, features, tool sets do you already have? Which I'll point out in most cases are literally zero incremental budget to test or try those. And start getting your feet wet, right? Start getting those under you. Do some challenger champion, old way, new way, 90-10 tests, with the caveat, of course, that it is, after all, called machine learning. So it's going to take the machine a little while to learn how to train on your own data and achieve the outcomes that you want. So don't give up after one day and say it doesn't beat the by hand way. And then the third step, obviously, is if this is going to be a true competitive advantage, you at some point need to start insourcing the capability for this and building an in-house capability. And the three of us have been around long enough to remember the days when we all were building our first company brand websites, and we just completely outsourced that, right, to ad agencies who hosted it, wrote all the copy. Well, now nobody does that, right, because that's a strategic asset, and that has now migrated back in-house, certainly with agency or partner help, but right, that's an in-house capability. And then at the fourth step, now you get into sort of the transformation, expand, build versus buy. This is the point where you go to your CFO and say, look, we've run 50 experiments. We know what the lift is. We know what the average incremental cost, if any, are. We can build a kind of a cost benefit analysis, CBA case, and then really make the big move from there. And then the final and fifth step in this, in our research, which is only rare air for a few companies, is that a few companies will get or have gotten so good at building this kind of a AI first system for themselves in-house that they're actually able to now license that to other companies as a new revenue stream. But only a very few companies will get to that point. Most will get to that sort of AI first, fully transformed state. And so that was sort of what we found in the research and the basis of the roadmap.
I like that, sort of, that there's an opportunity down the road to even go bigger on this thing and maybe even start or spin out a business. Kind of interesting. Hey, Jim, I want to check something with you, though. So in the research that you did, I've heard some people say that marketing is the area that's most likely to be most affected by AI. I realize you're a professor of marketing. We all come from marketing, so maybe we're all biased, but I'm trying to get an independent view. Is marketing the area of a business that's most likely to be most affected, do you think, or no?
I would agree with that statement, Greg, for, I will say, both strategic but also empirical reasons. So briefly on each of those, for strategic reasons, we use the word AI, right? But I mean, really what we're talking about is machine learning as a subset of AI. I mean, we're not generally talking about robotics or expert systems or some of the other things that fall under the big tent of AI. Yeah. So if you think about what machine learning does particularly well, it's very good at classifying, predicting, and generating. Now, if you think about what marketers do every day, they spend a lot of time classifying, right? Like, what countries are better opportunities for us? What market segments should we enter, right? What targets are our prime prospects? That's classification problem. Then we think a lot about predicting, and that's the proverbial but very real right product, right customer, right time, right offer, right message, right place, right channel. That's a prediction problem. And then generating, right? We spend a lot of time, right, actually creating the stuff. And some of it is big idea, ideation, creation, and generation, high concept. But awful lot of it is, can you resize this 250 by 250 to a 640 by 410 and lower the res, right? So we have a really nice match, Greg, between what the technology, what the algorithm does especially well, and what marketers do all day long or need help and improvement with. So that's my strategic reason. My empirical reason is there's a lot of data that bear out exactly what you say. I'm thinking in particular of a study McKinsey released about a year ago where they looked at impact on both top-line growth and cost savings. I'm sure you've seen this across all areas of the firm who are implementing AI. And no doubt, to your point, Greg, their empirical evidence from their survey shows that marketing is the biggest beneficiary of this, closely followed by sort of operations and supply chain, as you might imagine, for some cost savings and efficiency reasons.
Yeah, it's funny. As I was listening to you, I go, that sounds like a supply chain issue too, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I've got a question for you about the way people have been thinking about AI replacing versus maybe not replacing. And when my co-author and I were working on our book, we initially began to think about all the people worried about replacement. I think some of that will happen, but then we were doing a training session at the Inc. 5000 event where they are basically honoring the people who are the fastest growing. We reflected on it and we said, Greg at the MMA has this old first generation phone that sits behind him because the MMA used to be the Mobile Marketing Association. And I'm like, I bet you could make that phone for like $1 today or something like that. But nobody wants that. They pay over $1,000 for their handsets now because we always want the next best thing, and we reward growth more than we, focus on bottom line. Though you have to have some profit. Do you think that that those data points tell us that we will see AI applied to accelerate growth and get more done and a massive productivity boom? Or do you think we're going to see a lot of replacement in marketing specifically?
Yeah, so Gartner just recently released a survey that exactly underscores your point there, Rex, which is, what is the top number one issue for CEO and CFO pairings? And by far, it is growth, right? Like that is absolutely the number one objective. And to at least my students' great shock, maybe to your listeners and viewers as well, cost savings and productivity is about, if memory serves, number 6, 7, or 8 on that list. So, right, shareholders, the market, your board, growth, right? As my old boss Eric Schmidt was fond of saying, revenue cures all known business problems, right? So, that's what we're looking for. Now, in terms of that application of AI, usually the way that I describe this to my students and to marketers when I'm working with them is, it's business school. I'm a professor, so of course everything has to be a 2x2, doesn't it? So I think about, the application area, the application space of AI in marketing. Is it either efficiency, productivity, cost savings, or is it growth? Is it doing the exact same output, getting to the exact same output that we always got to, but doing it cheaper, faster, with more, with less? Or is it getting us to some other new step change output that we just never could have gotten to before? And then the other axis is, am I applying that benefit, seeking that benefit rather, in my internal space, meaning for my staff behind my corporate firewall, only things that my staff will see, do, and use? Or am I applying it in the external space, meaning stuff my customers will see? And so now we've got sort of 4 quadrants there, right? So, you all know the solutions in these space. If I have an internal chatbot, my customers never see that, but that can make my staff a whole lot more efficient. But it's not going to unveil the next new ginormous growth idea, right? So you can kind of go through and populate those 4 zones. And I think it's fair to say that at least early on, and it's weird to say, right? Because obviously we all know AI started with the great Alan Turing posing the questions, can machines think, in October of 1950, but yet here we're 80 years later saying early on, right? But okay, early on in this wave of AI, I think the focus has been on, certainly, Rex, on the productivity, cost savings, efficiency. And arguably, I think a lot of that has been applied to, can I do more with less? Can I reduce headcount, FTEs, reassign my people to higher value added work? But that's just one of the 4 quadrants. And I think, we can talk more about, where I might see opportunity or what's being underappreciated. But I think, folks should pay attention to all 4 quadrants, not just the one that seems to be dominating this first cycle.
Well, Jim, maybe we can pick that up and run with that a little bit. So what do you actually see that marketers are doing to really get it right today? Like, what is capturing your attention? And you're right. Let's go to the fun build side rather than the staff efficient side, although God knows that needs to happen too.
Yeah. So on the growth side, right? So I would say, first of all, one of the things that we could do internally in terms of an underappreciated or underused, if I dare may say, application of AI is on, the big task that marketers have of segmentation, targeting, positioning. Now, this is going to send a shudder through everybody because people say, wait, that's marketing strategy. We can't have a machine do that or help us with that. That's human knowledge. Well, again, I'm a big believer in, this is human plus machine. This is human in the loop AI that I'm talking about here. This is not autonomous, like we said it and nobody knows what's going on and it posts tweets without us. I'm not talking about that. So, the first thing I would say is that, Rex, I know you're familiar with this very well. There's a whole area of data science around k-means clustering. We're using some factor analysis first to kind of clean up, pre-process the data to kind of get us to a set of clusters. We'll call those target segments or primary target, secondary target, tertiary target. I mean, there's other means beyond k-means, the Gaussian analysis and some other techniques that we can use to do that. And I'm not suggesting that replaces focus groups or ethnographies. I mean, those are all very important techniques that we have as marketers. But I think, if you've got 4 million rows of data, let's let AI also help us classify those into what might be kind of a really well thought out, scientifically defensible set of target audiences and segments. And there are third-party tools like Heap and others that do that. You can do that yourself using Google BigQuery. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do that. But I think that's one that, at least from my perspective, not enough marketers are chasing that right now. They're more worried about like a customer service chatbot and will it jailbreak and say something bad to my car buyers, which is fine for experimenting. But imagine this, if we could have better segmentation, wouldn't that be awesome?
Well, that is exactly why I went over and became the chief AI officer at Claritas. It was, I had been working on AI personalization. I'm like, man, if we can connect this startup company, or say with what Claritas has, that's revolutionary. And I got to tell you, you've nailed the use case, and it sent chills down my spine when I first ran one of these. And not only did it do a better job clustering and segmenting, but now I could talk to it.
Right.
And the
How
first
cool
one I
is that?
gave, oh, exactly. And you're like, wow, it just named itself. We gave it a couple different boats from Brunswick, which is a member of MMA Global. And one of them was just the zip codes of people who bought an aluminum fishing boat. Whereas the other one was kind of the zip codes of people who bought a more ocean, higher end, more affluent boat. And just with that data alone connected to Claritas's profile data, it knew what type of boat it would prefer. And it named itself Earl. And Earl was wearing a John Deere hat and Carhartt shirt and faded Levi's that he'd had for years, and talked about his best trips were going out onto the serene lake in his local area where he could enjoy nature and do something he loved and enjoyed. And it was amazing how much information and data it absorbed and how much more useful it was when these static storyboards that we used to generate from segmentations became interactive. So I think you nailed, that's such an exciting use case.
100%. And I would say then, yes, and the next step of that is, and you mentioned it, Greg, synthetic users, synthetic research, I think is very, very interesting. And just a quick story, as a business school professor, one of the things we do is kind of lead the discussions around case studies, right? We teach case studies in class where students learn from, businesses who have faced a certain situation. And one of the most nerve-wracking moments for a business school professor is the first day you walk into class to teach a new case for the first time, right? Because you don't know how this is going to unfold, what's going to happen. And so one of the things that we're doing a lot of in academia is then we load 3 student personas into a chatbot of your choice. The one who read the case, the one who agrees with you all the time, the one who disagrees and is a skeptic, the one who didn't read the case. And then you ask the chatbot to take on the role of one of those students, and you can run the whole class through a back and forth and then have it come back and tell you how you did and coach you on improving it. And so you can imagine, again, Rex, as you're saying, if you're a marketer, now again, this does not replace quantitative first-party research, ethnographies, et cetera. But, if I just want to validate some things or go a little bit deeper, right? This is stuff I never could have done before. At my desk, I could just ask it about Earl. Hey, if we were to launch a new product, what would Earl's reaction potentially be? And I get that instant back, right? So these are all things I never could have done before. It's beyond just cost savings.
So I have one more question for this, because this is a frontier of where I think the problem that I see. So you have this survey data, and this is something we're working on with Greg as well, because they have surveys of their members They have 7 years of data, but they repeat the study the next year. And what's interesting is I don't feel like the AI of this generation can yet anticipate or absorb enough data to anticipate how the answers will change next year. Its prediction is what the answers you gave last year, right? And so the interesting part is, can we begin to give it additional context to absorb where it can accurately predict the future? And if you're talking about a person, to where it can also begin to adapt based upon their mood. Basically, what you talked about earlier was zero-party data. Back with Google,
Yeah.
what was so interesting is that the same person who might be interested in, this topic right now, business, shifts to a leisure part, and their use case and their need states is totally different. Do you think that this generation of large language models can do that effectively? And what do we have to do to get there?
I would say partially. Why do I say partially? Is because you're right. These models that we have today, I'll say answer in air quotes. Of course, they're not answering, right? I mean, it's a
They're predicting, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a prediction based on the transformer technique, right? But basically, we're looking at the data that it has ingested, which is historical data, and then giving you a most probable, most likely outcome based on that. And so if there are black swans or future eventualities that were not in the training data, it's therefore not going to be part of the answer or the suggestion that it gives you. That said, my students and I were working on a little interesting experiment where what we did was we took a number of predictions, possibilities, eventualities, things that could or could not happen, inflation doubles, inflation halves, like these kinds of things, and then trained an existing LLM with that as additional input or prompts. And you use the chatbot of your choice. You can upload PDFs. You can give it other things, right? You tell it to play a role and take additional information as context into its answer or its prediction. And that's how we got it to start, taking into account potential future scenarios and not just repeating what it's seen in the past. Not perfect, but it's simulated.
Were you using multi-agent models so that they could also interact and then have interaction effect and emergent behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, emergent behavior is the other way that this sort of happens, right? I mean, we should talk, again, I just put a fine point on this for all your listeners. I mean, we always have to remind ourselves that this is not like a database VLOOKUP where, when you type something in, it goes and finds the exact answer and spits it back out, and we can go figure out where it got the answer. I mean, there is such a thing as XAI, explainable AI to some extent, but largely there is an X factor or a B factor, y equals mx plus b, b is the random variable, which gives these models emergent properties that even its own coders and designers can't quite understand or surprise them. So yeah, I mean, we were definitely doing that. And we should, by the way, if you want, guys, talk a little bit about agents and its potential impact on brands and brand decision-making, when every consumer has a shopping agent talking to every brand's shopping bot.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Yep.
It's coming. How far away do you think we are from that, Jim, by the way?
Well, I mean, there's a number of, those existing agents that are out there. I've played with them, as I'm sure you have. And, the demos that they have, which you would think that the demo ought to be at the high watermark of being able to accomplish a high-level task. The demo is plan a trip to Hawaii. I run it 100 times and it fails 98 times. On their own demo, right? So, I mean, I think we're fairly far away from that. But that said, it is fairly surprising that, it can then decompose a big task like that or a big direction of plan a trip to Hawaii into all the subtasks, right? That means I need a flight. That means I need hotels. Yeah. That means I need activities for the kids. It can figure all of those things out. So, I think that, if you think about high involvement or high risk purchases and brands versus, I'll call them repetitive or replacement purchases, prom dress versus toilet paper, and high ticket versus low ticket. I really do think that at a certain point, this is what sort of Amazon repeat buy auto purchases, right? The dog food just shows up on my doorstep. Okay, well, I set that up as a human myself to make that happen. But really, I ought to be able to go in and say, I've just had twins. Please find for me what is the best organic diaper that's highly rated, that's especially good on being leak proof, fits my budget, find it, put it on my Discover card, and have what I need shipped to me on a regular basis. That's not like a crazy ask. And I think it's not a crazy ask. And I think, we're getting to that point, and brands really need to be thinking along that direction too, not just, chatbots.
And
The thing, though,
I, as a
about that-
consumer, would like to have it, by the way. So let's be sure to repeat that to them. Like, I'd love to have that ease of convenience, right?
Right?
Well, and here's a question for you, Greg, as you think about that, and for Jim as well. But speaking of the twins, my twin boys have decided to move forward with a startup around this area around agents. And the twist that they have on it is about giving consumers control over their own data. Because the issue becomes, we have these agents, and it could feed off of all the data that we've purchased, but then that's still owned by who? And are you comfortable with who owns it? And we know the story from Target of the angry father who came back and said, "You're sending me these pregnancy, things like that, and that's not happening in my household." And then he found out, a few days later that his teenage daughter was in fact pregnant. And Target's answer to me was, "Well, we're going to disguise it now. We're still going to do that, but we're going to do it where we mix it in with lawnmower ads and other things, so it isn't so on the nose." But it still is sort of that factor of, do we really, as we go into this phase, if we thought there was a lot of data on the internet about us, wow, you ain't seen nothing yet. Just interact with an agent for a while and how much better it knows you.
Or the interpretation and application of that data is kind of the part that's been hard, right?
Yeah, so I think I'd love to hear your thoughts. First of all, Greg, whether you'd be comfortable, if you'd rather have control of your own data, or whether you think it doesn't matter. And then Jim, what you think about how do we get to a new world? Because I feel like we're all that same first internet generation, and I think we made the mistake of not being cynical enough about data and privacy and ownership. I certainly raised my hand. I mean, I was the first one to implement the third-party cookie on Wired when I needed to connect Wired.com and Cocktail.com to have my dashboard read it out, not knowing what advertisers would do it later on. So how do we get it right this time?
Well, listen, first off, I'm not comfortable with my teenage daughter being pregnant. I want to just be clear about that, if that's part of the question said here.
Or Target knowing about before you do.
Or Target knowing. I just would prefer that we can avoid that as best we could right now, just as sort of one of it. Yeah, I don't know, Rex. I think that I've always been a little blasé about sort of the data and its application and so on, and sort of it being out there. Although, I also respect too, especially as a guy who runs trade associations, not two of them, that, I realize that privacy is a high sensitive area for, a lot of people. And therefore, from that standpoint, we need to operate in that way.
Jim,
I don't know if there's
what do
enough
you
money,
think?
and it'll be interesting to see if your sons figure out if there's enough money in that to pass along. That's always been part of the issue with that business model.
Oh,
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think sort of on the big arc here, if you think of sort of the user primitives, meaning your location, your payment credentials, your digital footprints, right? Sort of an internet kind of 1.0, those primitives became largely the domain of, the large companies. And we had sort of either explicit or implicit value exchange, which said, in addition to some of your services, access to information, things that you provide, like the implicit handshake is, great, you can have and then reuse those primitives about me in other ways that you can monetize and grow your business in exchange for map information, seeing social updates from my friends, etc. I think that there's been some, attempts at this out of the MIT Media Lab. There's a project that's, long been in progress called Pods, where, this is Tim Berners-Lee project, right? Where he's tried to say, no, maybe what we actually have is a sort of a two-way encrypted vault in the cloud where I can upload my primitives, my information. And if I want car insurance, I, in essence, RFP the car insurance companies and give them limited access into my pod locker. They then come back with a personalized quote for me, but they don't have, own, or keep that information, as opposed to if I put a device in my car's dashboard, well, I might save 10% of my car insurance, but then they know everywhere I drive and everything that I do, right? So I think there's been some energy around that, though it really obviously hasn't kind of broken through. And so, this is one of those things, Greg, as you point out, where when you survey users, people, they'll say that that's something they're very concerned about, yet their behavior would sort of say otherwise.
Suggest no.
Yeah.
Suggest they're not really concerned. Although there is a group that is, highly sensitive. And so, I mean, that's always been kind of the driving that I think the digital age has had to sort of contend with. And in a polite way. I don't mean to be disrespectful to people's concerns about that or what they need to do. We've always had to operate against that.
Yeah,
I just wonder if we have to make it so easy and just build it in, and it isn't really, to your point, a big enough differentiator for consumers to take the time to deal with extra complexity. But if it's just built in and we build, I mean, I think we and the people listening to this show have an opportunity to build the AI future that we want. We have a very short window to get it right, just like we had a couple of years in the internet. I mean, that third-party cookie was implemented. Gosh, I was director of research in '95. And probably within the first 6 months of we did it. And then it came back as a patent fight. And they said, oh, no, because you guys already did it at Wired, anybody can use it and do it. That one agency could own it. And within 2 years, that's just how we did things. And we did it that way for 30 years. But it wasn't friendly.
It wasn't set up. It wasn't supposed to be the solution it ultimately became. I mean, it sort of took on a life of its own. Hey, Jim, I want to go back to something here for the listeners, though, because listen, let's assume here you've been doing more work against this, talking to more marketers for longer and also too, I could just tell. So listen, I've known you a few years. Like I can tell that sort of working with MBA students is keeping you sharp. Like you're doing what professors need to do to think it all through. Okay, every condition. Okay, if you were to give a list to marketers today. Just, keep it simple. Top 3 things, top 3 areas. Let's do this. How about top 3 areas of marketing that they want to think about applying AI? Do you have a sense of what that direction you would give to people today would be?
Yeah, so the first advice I would give on number 1 of 3 on that list would be don't start with chasing a shiny object, which is somewhat kind of cliche marketer advice, but yet we all end up chasing shiny objects at some point. So I would start by saying,
worst. Yeah, exactly. That's our thing.
So I would start by saying, like, look, if this technology offers higher fidelity predictions, you need to start this process by saying, what is it in my business that if I could predict it with much greater fidelity would unlock a step change increase in business value? Okay, so that's going to vary from company to company, but just a quick example. I hear from like B2B marketers, B2B sales teams, they've got these very, very well-trained, highly paid, expensive white glove sales teams. And when they actually get in front of a prospect in the room with a pitch, they're very good and have a high closing rate. However, the problem is they often end up in a meeting with the wrong people with a solution that doesn't meet the other side's needs, right? That didn't quite match. And, you have inside sales and you do pre-qualifications, et cetera. But, 6 Sense, Radiant 6, there's a lot of companies out there who are now using AI predictive techniques to try and align what's the next best call, next best prospect, next best message in a B2B space. Okay. So that's a prediction problem.
That's a know your customer and know prediction. I mean, in some regards, you're talking about like the Netflix recommendation engine at some level or Amazon product recommendation, which is huge success for those companies and valuable to us. So you're applying that to B2B. It's kind of what you're saying, I think, right?
Yeah, right. It's I mean, it's the same. Like Netflix was saying, if I could predict better what's the next movie to show somebody, then my watch time would go up, right? Yeah. So it's a prediction. Yep. It's what is your prediction problem, right? Yep. Because that's what this tool does. So don't run around saying, can we use a chatbot here, or can we create different versions of imagery there, run around saying, what can we predict better? Or what do we need to predict better? Like that's the first thing.
Okay.
Then the second thing I would say is you personally, as a marketer, whether you're senior, mid-level, junior marketer, whether you're on the agency side or the brand side or the consultant side, you need to personally get your hands dirty in the middle of using these tools. And this is very similar to, the three of us 10 years ago would have said it's one thing to like watch a PowerPoint presentation about Facebook, and it's another thing to be on Facebook, right?
Yep.
So I still, go into these meetings, I say, raise your hand if you have used ChatGPT Turbo 4 Plus more than 4 times in the past 2 days.
Totally.
Like that should be 100% of everybody's hands up.
Yeah.
Or Bard Gemini or whatever your favorite tool is.
Correct. And I would ask, it's funny what the MMA just did for all of its employees. We just bought a license to ChatGPT for everybody in the company. I mean, listen, if you as a company are not providing the tools to them, you're not really paying attention. That's a manager's responsibility. I agree. 100%.
That's right.
Yep.
Now, obviously, we can talk if you'd like about some of the, guardrails and concerns and company data and all those kinds of things. And I don't mean to minimize those, but you got to start playing with these tools.
Yep.
And then the third is one of the exciting things, at least for me, and I know for both of you, about being in marketing and being a marketer, is it's a dynamically evolving career learning journey, right? Like if you think about what we were doing and what we knew 10 years ago, 20 years ago versus what we're learning and doing now, it just keeps evolving. So, a lot of ways to get smart, but my third recommendation would be you can't just learn this by listening in a meeting. So you got to get some training here. A lot of ways to do that. All the big providers, IBM Watson X has a free 10-hour course that's fabulous. Microsoft, Google, everybody's got one of those. The Marketing AI Institute does a nice job of this. You guys have some podcast content. We have a course here at Kellogg called AI for Executives. Take one of those courses. It's 10 hours, start to finish. So I would say find the prediction problem, get your hands dirty in the tool, and train yourself.
Got it.
I love it. You started at the top of the show talking about that you need to be fully educated. I'm glad you came back to that point. If we have time, I think we have time for maybe two quick points. One is I'd love to hear you talk more about the privacy part, because particularly with corporations who are maybe listening in the podcast as well, what I've read certainly from OpenAI and Google is that they are not using the information you're putting in the chat back into the training part, though some of that seems to be changing a little bit as the context is going. And Google did have a little problem where if you shared your chat, it accidentally showed up in search. They quickly took that down, said that was a mistake. We fixed it. How should you think about that when you're thinking about, I've got this great spreadsheet of data, I want to have it do some of the interpretation, or I've got some of this information I want it to read and digest and help me with that.
Yeah. So look, marketers briefly need to be very, very cognizant of 5 risks of implementing AI. Confidentiality of corporate information, that's what you were referring to. Legal issues, rights issues, ownership issues. Accuracy issues, and now we get into hallucinations and bias and brand safety and jailbreaking and all those kinds of things. The 4th issue are employee, corporate, culture, workflow issues. And then the 5th, and I don't mean it to be last by any means, but these are the broader societal issues, deep fakes, these kinds of propaganda uses, et cetera, of the tools. So, you really need to think through all 5 of those. You put a very fine point, Rex, on the first one of those. And I always, always, always advise never, ever put any of your individual, personal, private information into one of those tools. Don't type your Visa card or your social security number in. And same thing at a corporate level. Don't do that on the publicly available versions of these. But all of these providers now, this is what we call a known and solved problem, have enterprise versions of these tools. So you can get an enterprise ChatGPT directly from OpenAI. Yep. There's one through Azure. Bard has one. They all have one. And, I talk to brands all the time who say, well, we can't use any of this because we have sensitive data. And I say, Procter & Gamble, Morgan Stanley, and Walmart have all solved this problem. Do you have anything more sensitive than those 3 have? And they go, gee, I guess not. So it seems like an insurmountable problem if you're just looking at the consumer-facing versions of these tools. But the enterprise versions of these tools solve a lot of these problems, by the way, including indemnification when it comes to image generation on the output, et cetera.
Yep, great.
Hey Jim, what do you think is most overhyped? Anything you want to pick on to tell people this? We've been so positive here and excited about what to go do. Is there any, hey guys, there's probably not much opportunity over there. Anybody you want to pick on? Think you want to pick on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, you know, Gartner hype cycle, or maybe, as we say, crank it up to 11, right? From famous movie. I think a lot of this is up at 11 here, and I mean, we just need to be realistic. It will do many things, and it will do many things amazingly well. But it can't do everything, right? I mean, it's limited based on the information that it has. It's limited based on the ability of the user, right? Like prompt generation, prompt engineering is a real thing. If you go in and say, write me a resignation email, it's going to write a generic, crappy resignation email, right? But if you say, with plenty of context and background and follow good prompt practices, it can do it pretty well. But I would say at this point, now, never say never. I would say at this point, a lot of the sort of the core strategic thinking that marketers need to do, it cannot do on its own. It can help you, it can coach you, it can augment you, but it cannot do that on its own. Whereas on the other hand, and Rex, curious on your thoughts here, it certainly can resize my banners on its own, right? Like I tell it what sizes I need, I give it the input, it will generate that stuff. So I would say, Greg, create me a new business, build me a marketing plan. It can do an okay job on that, but it wouldn't get more than a C in my MBA course.
Oh, okay. Well, now we've been graded. That'll scare us all a little bit. Wait. I am a C-level student. That's how I got into marketing, Jim. Marketing was the industry created for C-level students. That's how we got here.
There you go.
C-level executives now, right? Well, just maybe a last question here before we wrap up. What's your prediction for when you think it will be able to do that more artificial general intelligence and be able to do the full arc of the role? Or you can cheat a little bit, the Lang chain and so forth, where there'll be vendors who will cleverly have connected enough of the different capabilities to do it.
Yeah, I mean, at the Turing lectures in London, or at Cambridge rather, over Christmas this year, there's some people far smarter than me, far deeper into the models and the math behind this, are projecting that in the next 5 years or so, where we might get to that point. I mean, that's such a hard prediction, right? To see when we get to that point. But I will say, if we can, rather than think about like just big whole cloth problems like build me an entire marketing plan, if you start to decompose that into a series of steps, and that says, like, what is a good template for a marketing plan? What are the right questions to ask in a world-class marketing plan? Right? Those are strategic helpers or augmenters, and I think we're getting much closer to having those kinds of things than, just magically tell these systems what we want. And I don't know, we could all go to Tahiti and take a beach vacation while it does our job. I think we're a fair ways from that, I would say.
Right. I think AT&T.
Do you think we will go?
Wait,
I was going to say, do you think we will go to Tahiti, or do you think you'll just create new work?
No, do you guys remember the? Do you guys remember the AT&T ad that was like what the future? It was AT&T's view of the future. Do you remember what they said was on that? We can fax from the beach.
There you go.
A very famous 1999 ad from AT&T.
Yes, but again, look, I mean, I would just, again, my old boss Eric Schmidt was very famous for telling us over and over, don't bet against the internet, right? A bet against the internet is a bad bet. So, to say it can't, it won't, it will never.
Yeah,
I wouldn't make those kind of predictions.
Yeah, I don't think we've even seen. I mean, my board asked me the other day. They were like, CMOs. They're like, well, I don't really know if I know. And I go, let's remember, we haven't seen the Uber application for mobile yet in AI. We haven't seen. I mean, ChatGPT is kind of butting up against that at some level. But it's not a real I'm using it yet, and Uber in many ways completely transformed how all marketers think about their customers and the expectations that customers had. I mean, it was transformational. So
indeed.
I don't know, Rex, you want to start to take us out?
Sure. That's it for this episode of Decoding AI for Marketing. I'm Rex Briggs,
and I'm Greg Stewart.
Be sure to listen to more episodes. Subscribe, follow, rate, or review in your favorite podcast app.